Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today you're in for a treat. In my family, as my dad and I mainly running the show, there are certain movies that are just a part of our heirlooms to the family. And I've shared tons of them. The one I'm about to share is one of those super staples. It's an incredible movie released in 1983, and it's directed by Doug Trumbull. I wasn't aware that he directed the film until just recently. And given that he was in 2001 and Drama Strain and so many of the other ones I've covered, if I ever see his name, anything that I love, I bring it up. But he's sort of a heartbeat of excellence. It stars Christopher Walken, Louise Fletcher, Natalie Wood, to name a few. Louise Fletcher, just in case you don't remember, she was Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Natalie Wood's just been famous since she was a kid. She's one of the most beautiful women to ever grace Hollywood screen. So you're in good hands. There's an incredibly famous Twilight Zone actor, Cliff Roberson, who plays this gentleman named Alex. So let me set up the names real quick, because then we're going to get into this film. I'm going to cover it from start to finish, but I'm going to give you a couple jump out points. I'm going to give you the setup jump out point, so you can get out just like I gave you an extended trailer. Then I'm going to give you the jump out point before we get to Act 3 in the traditional sense of writing. Christopher Walken plays Dr. Michael Brace. Louise Fletcher plays Lillian Reynolds, Dr. Lillian Reynolds. Natalie Wood plays Karen Brace, Michael's wife in the movie. Cliff plays this sort of research center lead named Alex. And another famous actor named Joe Dorsey plays a gentleman named Hal. Those are the main characters. This film is going to cover an invention that is coming towards us, okay? That's what's really important about this. And what's always the sort of make or break moment in a script is, Stanley Kubrick said, look, you can make anything look like a documentary. You can tell any story, but is it interesting? It is the job of a writer to take a premise and meld it with a story and make it interesting, and to go down all the paths that the listener or viewer didn't really think it through. And like, oh, surprise, surprise, surprise. This movie delivers on every level. And even though it is attempting to be very science fiction, which means this stuff could be built if you just figured out the technology, as opposed to sci-fi where someone pulls out, a wand and casts a spell. Nothing wrong with either genre, but this is science fiction. But what they're able to do in this film, combining story and science fiction together, I think tops pretty much all the movies ever that try to attempt this, right? In 2001: A Space Odyssey, it is the same level of quality, another Doug Trumbull special effects film. He's a director in this film, but it deals with a different area of reality. So for the area of reality that this covers, which is much nearer future than what 2001: A Space Odyssey should probably be 2101 if you really want to push it somewhere where you're going to get to everything that's in that film. But this is a technology that allows a machine to record all the senses of man into a tape, because this is at 1983. We're going to get into the details. We're going to get into the story. This is going to be very comprehensive. In some of the stuff I've covered, I will skip certain things because I want you guys to see the film, and I don't need to spoil it for you. We'll have a few of those in this film. Sometimes I get some of the chronology mixed up. I paid a lot more attention to this particular movie and taking my notes. Hadn't seen it in a few years. Saw some new stuff I didn't quite process, and the billion times I saw this before. But this is a visual masterpiece. Whoever's director of photography, cinematography, did a brilliant job. Doug did a brilliant job. All the actors nailed it. I mean, it's just a couple sort of character actors that have a couple lines that, not quite hitting it as hard as the pros, but they're just one line here, one line there. No big deal. But this is something you might put in your quiver. I rented it for $4. Every once in a while, Netflix has it for free, but it's called Brainstorm. Yeah, I'm going to mention the credits real quick because when you see the credits of this film, and if any of you were alive in 83 and watching movies, you'll be aware around 83 to 85, there was a lot of 3D movies that came out. Friday the 13th, Part 3 in 3D, Jaws 3 in 3D. There's a bunch of just eclectic ones that came out. It looks to me like there was maybe a concept that they were going to put this into 3D. It should have been 3D at some point because it would have survived a lot of really cool stuff in 3D, but they must have pulled it back for budgetary concerns. But the credits, if you watch them, really look like they're trying to give you a 3D effect because they bow out towards the screen. The graphics are Doug Trumbull at his best in 83. The computers, the environments, they're extremely realistic. It's not some cheesy, B-movie, approach. It is very, very serious. But the movie starts out and they're in the middle of an experiment. And of course, as the viewer, if I said to you today what I just told you, you might be like, yeah, I've seen other things like that. This is one of the first, if not the first, to ever suggest such a thing. And then to do it to the level they did it, it's pretty mind-blowing. I know I say all the time, but it's true. But Christopher Walken is inside this crazy contraption with this big helmet on. It's just full of circuitry and all kinds of stuff. And you can hear that they've got systems cooling off superconductors. 83. It's pretty amazing. They realize they need to take the chips and chill them down so that they run at the speed that they need them to run at to pull off this experiment. And what's happening is it takes you a couple seconds to figure out what's going on. There's another guy named Gordy. His real name's Gordon, but they call him Gordy. He's sort of late 30s, early 40s guy, but he's sort of the Casanova of the lab. And he's got another helmet on. And he's got this cart that they're pushing around, which has the computer on it. Big giant tether straight to the back of his helmet. And they're conducting an experiment to hit all 5 senses. And so they're taking him from room to room doing different things. And we just keep watching Lillian, who is Louise Fletcher's character. She's just monitoring it, and she's a chain smoker. She's smoking. Christopher Walken's just in there, man. It's one of his best roles ever. I mean, he has a full range of cool stuff he does. He isn't quite Deer Hunter, but it's very cool. But the guy goes into a room where a chef has a bunch of ingredients, and, he's supposed to eat some stuff to see if Walken, who's getting a repeat of what he's experiencing, gets it. Now, he's obviously seeing what the guy sees, so sight's taken care of. And sound's working, but they're going to do a little extra for that too. But he goes into this guy, and the chef's like, what do you want? I'll give you anything you want. He says, I'll take some of that steak. And he goes, okay, here's some steaks. And he goes, give me some of that marshmallow. And give me some of this. And he basically built a sundae, like a banana split sundae on top of a steak, and feed it to him with marshmallow. Obviously a little shock and awe, like, ooh, that's kind of gross, right? So the next room they go into is a sound room, so it's all soundproof, and they have like a synthesizer there. There's a woman in there, and she's a young gal in the lab. And so they play a bunch of classical music to him. So looks like that's working, because Christopher Walken's having a few little responses, right? And then it's sort of over, and they go to the next room, and he's like, I got one more thing I want to do, one more thing. And Hal, this dude who's kind of the producer, coordinator guy, he's not a scientist, he's helping out. He's a little bit older than everybody. And there's a chimpanzee, I think the chimpanzee's name's Lima, and she's got little electrodes on her head, and she's signing to the guy, and he's like, how you doing, Lima? And she's signing. He's like, I know, it's rough being a guinea pig, And he looks over at this other lab technician for Lima, and he says, is her inputs on the same plug? He's like, oh, standard input. And he's like, So he unplugs the plug from Lima and puts it into the helmet after he takes it off, puts it down. He puts it into the helmet for Christopher Walken. And suddenly Christopher Walken gets Lima's life inside the cage. And it's like this crazy transition where he's like, whoa, I'm inside of a primate at this point, right? And that it's a little crazy in the room. All the little sirens go off and Lillian shuts off the computer. And they run up to Walken and he's in there. And he's just like, whoa, he's shaking a little bit, he's a little freaked out. And she's like, are you okay? Are you okay? And Christopher Walken starts... he starts making weird noises and he's just screwing around with them. And so finally he looks at him and then Gordy finally gets back to the room and he says, man, something wrong with you, man. He's like, well, man, it's just an experiment of like animal nature, and it's a huge success. Everything worked. And it's the first time they brought it all together. And so he goes, we need a drink. We got a toast. And he says they're going to drink champagne, but Walken goes over to the refrigerator and gets a can of beer, big giant can of beer, and starts pouring it out for everybody. I think it's a steel top too. Now, to explain these machines a little bit, and again, if you're coming in through the podcast, this will have tons of pictures while I'm explaining this. It's this big giant tape. It's probably about 4 inches tall. And of course, it's a tape, so it goes around a reel to reel. But they use that sort of holographic tape that was coming on around that time. You could get it for toys and you could buy it. It's beautiful. And then they shoot lasers on it, so it even looks more cool. It looks very tangibly real. Now, of course, today we brought all that stuff into memory. What's nice about tape is it's just physical writing, a data to a tape. And so you can go just as fast as you can spin the tape and as dense as the memory is on the tape. But of course, we have alternatives today. But it makes the movie very sexy. It's very cool. So everything's great. And now it's time for Michael, which is Christopher Walken's character. I'm going to start calling him Michael from this point forward. He's coming through the lobby of this super cool place. I don't know where it is. I think I looked it up once. It's a sexy freaking building in this movie, and it really just takes us out of our current day and time. But it's not supposed to be terribly out of our day and time. It's really fine if it's 83. They're not trying to be in the future. He drives a brown Bronco that's just normal, and they have a station wagon as well. Hal has a station wagon. So it's no big deal. But this place is super cool. It's a research center. It has this really cool logo, but they don't really have a name for it. Eventually, way down the line, you're going to have Alex's character, the guy who runs the place. He's going to call the project Triad. It's really strange. You don't ever hear Triad mentioned until this one event happens. Well, it's no spoiler or anything. I don't really know if that's what it's called. But he's got one of those bikes that you sit down on. You see them every once in a while, like older guys on them. And you have some weird blinders on, and you lay down, you actually grab it and pedal with your feet as if you're sitting in a chair. I see these all the time on PCH. And it's always some guy in his 60s or something. It's around that time frame that either you bought that bike or you didn't buy that bike. But it's pretty cool. And it came out pretty brand new around that time frame. But he's carrying this crazy contraption through the lobby, and he's saying goodbye just so we can kind of see this futuristic place. He puts it down on the road outside and starts pedaling home. And then he gets to his pad. And most of the time, you're like, wow, a guy goes home to his house. What's the big deal? Don't need to describe that if you're reviewing a movie. I don't know where this house is. I assume it's still there in real life. I might look all this stuff up. You'll want to. It's unbelievably beautiful, this freaking house. The house is sort of a character in this movie, to be honest. Now, I will say that if you're going to watch this film and you like little Easter eggs and that kind of stuff, there aren't any traditional Easter eggs that I'm aware of, although you could probably pick apart some of the last part of the film. But one thing that becomes very apparent while he is pedaling home is he's passing sponsor after sponsor after sponsor, from GE Electric to 21st Century Realtor. Coca-Cola is definitely a sponsor of this film. Ruffles potato chips are a sponsor in this film. But they do a pretty brilliant job integrating the branding into the movie, except this first bike ride home. It's pretty obvious what's going on there. but I think the movie is probably pretty expensive. But Walken gets home, and he walks through the front door, and Karen, which is Natalie Wood's character, is playing the piano with this like little orchestra, and it sounds beautiful, and it's just this gorgeous freaking house. It's not like any house you've ever seen, ever. Even Frank Lloyd Wright would have probably, maybe he built the thing, I don't know, but it has this crazy pool that's just sort of integrated underneath the house, but it's inside the house. There's no normal geometry in this home at all. There's not like, the walls aren't parallel. It's just crazy. When you see this place, you're going to fall in love. But he comes in the room and he looks at her, and she just looks absolutely stunning, of course. And she's kind of smiling at him like, hey, honey, welcome home. Except over to the right, over by a window area, there's this dude there with a turtleneck on. He says, hi, Barry. And it's sort of Karen's new boyfriend. And you find out their marriage isn't functional, but they're living together. So Christopher's had this amazing day, but he's not close enough to his wife to say, hey, honey, we had this like landmark situation in human history at the lab. They're that distant that he goes upstairs to, or somewhere in the house, I should say. He goes into like an office bedroom sort of thing. You can see a little bank of computers in his room. He sits on the bed. He gets a little beer out of a little tiny refrigerator, which every kid wanted at that time. And he looks up to the corner of his room, and he's got a Wright brother sort of model up there, a little Einstein picture on it. And I think he says, we made it. So the next morning just comes just like that. This movie does not have any leisure points where you're like, oh, this is the filler. There's not a single moment in this entire film like that, except for maybe the ride home to hit the sponsor signs. That's it. And then you're in this film till it's over. But the next day we're back at the research center. And Alex, the Twilight Zone guy, Cliff, he is talking to Karen. And he's saying, look, I need you to make this big giant helmet way smaller, because she's a packaging person. For those of you who don't know what that means, anytime a piece of electronics is created, you have to create packaging around it to make it look pretty and appealing to the customer. It's like Beats headphones or anything, right? Sid Mead used to do packaging for Philips back in the day. Televisions and coffee makers. I mean, it's just crazy. But she's like, yeah, okay, cool. But then he says to her, and this kind of fills us in a little bit because we saw some weird thing at the house, right? Like, what's going on between these two, right? And Alex says, are you going to be okay working with Michael? She's like, yeah, sure. We're professional. It's cool. He says, okay. All right. I trust you. Switches over to Michael and Lillian. And they're walking down a hallway, and Hal's behind him, and they have to go to a meeting. And Lillian's pissed. You'll find out that Lillian's a chain smoker, and she is eternally paranoid that this project is going to get taken away from her. And the problem is there's a couple equations that she's really worried about. She knows the government is involved with the research center, and so she's like, don't give it to them because they'll pollute the technology and shelf it before we even have a chance to figure out what it can do. Which is sort of the catch-22. If they could figure out more about how to control it and what its spectrum is, then they could present a more safe platform as opposed to government snatching it before that point and then saying, whoa, this is way too, crazy. It would be like having lost the nuclear power plant because you did the atom bomb first and everybody's like, no nuclear anywhere, right? So she's kind of yelling at Hal while she's walking straight forward. And Michael's just constantly like, just calm down. Everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. She's like, you are so naive, man. And she's like, Hal, you blabbed your mouth, didn't you? That's why we're having this meeting. You went and told Alex what happened yesterday, and you should have shut up. And Hal's just like this. He's not a dope or anything, but he's definitely not privy to what her previous experience has been. You're going to find out later that Lillian went to Caltech. Which, for those of you who are not familiar with all the United States universities, Caltech is number one in the world. For us, excuse me. It's the number one in the United States. MIT is second. And you may have an exception here and there, but usually Caltech kids go in and do a bunch of stuff, and they get sucked into Los Alamos labs or other facilities, and you never hear about them. Whereas MIT gets to publish their famous people because they're not quite that high. MIT people probably join Mensa. Caltech people join Prometheus. So they sit down with Alex, and he goes, I hear you had a breakthrough. Lillian's like, God damn it, who the hell, Hal told me, right? It's kind of funny, Hal 9000, you got a Hal in this movie. Trumbull worked on both movies. So she's like, no, we didn't have one, and then Michael goes, we did, we had a breakthrough. And he's like, great, man. He goes, she goes, look, the chips are required to, massive cooling, and it's really not ready for prime time because of this chip problem we've got. And that's when Alex pulls out this little black case that you might give a girl a beautiful necklace in. It's one of those flat ones, right? And he opens up and he goes, here, this is from so-and-so division. This is a room temperature superconductor. Have fun, kids. And she's impressed. She's like, oh my God, this is cool. This is going to change the game. Even though she hates the situation, she can't deny they were just given the holy grail of technology. But Alex has a little catch. He says, look, I want you to make me a demo because I need to show the division heads. Make me a demo that blows my socks off. And so they set out to do this. Now, Lillian does remind Alex, look, you're moving too fast. You're moving too fast. It's going to be a problem if you move too quickly. You're not experienced with this. I am. You do run this place, but you're not a scientist, But before they create this demo reel, we go back to the house. And now it's daytime. And Karen and Michael there. And this is when you get to see the pool. And they have a son named Chris, who's a bit of a little punk. He's played perfectly by this kid. He's just kind of like, yeah, thanks, Dad, whatever. But there's a realtor there. And there's two people that just bought the house. They have signed the papers, all this stuff. And, it's one of these awkward moments where you're meeting the people and you're getting a divorce, basically. And so these people get to buy your house, and so they're looking at him. And he looks at him. He says, look, this is a very special house. I built this thing myself. It's very special. And they're like, we get it. We think this is super special. That's why we're buying it. So they walk off. And Michael turns to Karen and he goes, do you like these people? And she goes, no, but they own the house now. He's like, God damn it. So they talk briefly about where Michael's going to stay, and Michael's like, hey, I don't need to be here to, mess with your world. You can live here. He says, do you think you can handle the packing? And she's like, yeah, I can handle the packing. She goes, you could just stay over at the center. I mean, they got plenty of rooms. That's where Lillian lives. And so you guys could just crank out stuff constantly. And he confirms with her, you're good working on the packaging, right? And she's like, yeah, I'm good. So the next day at the lab, they start this demo reel. And the first thing they do is they put the Gordy guy inside a flight simulator. And it's gorgeous, but they don't claim to be creating the flight simulator using necessarily software. I don't know if that's exactly what they're saying, but they've got Gordy inside this contraption that's giving him the G experience. It's not quite the one that, twirls around all the other movies. But they also have this camera on a jet, a model of a jet in a real world with some graphics around it on screens. And so it all composites together so he can control this thing. And of course, Gordy's this horn dog. And so he ends up seeing that the assistant in the room with the other prop is this really gorgeous girl. So he starts driving the ship off the grid just so he can take a look at her. And she's like, sir, hey, and so we get the sense that he's sort of a little Casanova. It's important later on. Next thing he does, he rides horseback. After that, he goes to a swim park, like a water park, and he gets on one of those slides, the tube slides, right? He's got all these hot girls with him. He's all dressed up in a wetsuit. He's got the helmet on, the gross one. And he goes down the chute after they go down. He's following them down. Meanwhile, Michael and Lillian are monitoring what he's creating in a van with Hal. They're just laughing their ass off. And I believe there's a Formula One car thing too. It's not quite a Formula One. It's like a couple stages down, but it's definitely a really cool, it's way over a go-kart. Let me just tell you that. But he's racing around that thing too. But then it switches back to the lab. And Michael and Lillian and Karen are all talking about the new form factor for how they could do this thing on the head. What's interesting about it is we're at that point now where they're trying to put chips inside our head, right? And so what's interesting about this is that it's essentially playing this to the brain through the skull using this much more tangible thing. It doesn't block the eyes at all. It's just touching both sides of the skull and kind of wrapping around. And if you guys are into the technology, you can listen to what Walken says. And they're on this really cool, like early 80s 3D monitor, which with a 3D pad. And these things really existed. You had like a little wand and you would touch 3D points. And she just hits like 2 or 3 keys. It's almost like Revenge of the Nerds. She hits 2 or 3 keys and all of a sudden, boom, this new form factor's around the head. Really kind of funny, guys. Meanwhile, Lillian's just chain smoking. The next scene we see is Alex sitting at his desk, the guy who's running the whole show, right? And you hear that sound. You hear the sound. The tape plays. It makes this really cool whirly noise. It's like this crystal whirly noise. It's truly super awesome in this film. It just, no matter what technology would come up with, they'd probably have this sound no matter what. But he's sitting there grinning. And all of a sudden we go into what he's seeing, and he's racing that car, and he is riding that horse. But Alex gets done with the demo, pops his headset off, and he is like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing ever. He turns to Karen, and he says, I think you can make this thing even smaller. And she's, oh yeah, no problem. Turns to the guys, says, this is just amazing. You just blew my socks off. I need a new demo that's even better for the division heads, now that you've proven it to me. Now, one of the funny points that they make at this point in the movie is about the technology itself being capable of being pumped through a telephone. Now, what's really funny about this for you tech heads is that we did this later on in life because we invented modems around 83. And they were like 900 baud modems, man, they were even smaller than that. But you know what it went to? It went to a 56K modem. That is crap bandwidth for the kind of bandwidth that it would take to make this technology, right? At least I think it is. I mean, visual cortex alone would be a huge array of super dense pixels, right? We just know that. So there's no way in hell that the crappy phone system would push this technology through. Just a little side note that I think you guys would think is pretty funny. And the funny thing is, when Skype came out and we started doing chats, I remember one of my buddies I was chatting with in Peru. He had a light bulb burn out in his office. It just went tink, the way a fluorescent bulb or normal luminescent bulb goes out. And I remember saying to him, like, oh my God, did you have a bulb go out? It was so clear. The internet phone was so clear. And later I talked to some guys and they said, oh yeah, because the garbage bandwidth used for an average telephone call is horrid. That's why it's so noisy. And that's why it stopped at 56K baud, because they couldn't go any higher because the phone lines were just built to handle phone calls and I handle digital data. So it was a stretch getting it to 56K. I heard that Germany had experimented with up to 78, but the error rate got so heavy, they basically pulled out. So Michael, flash forward a little bit in the film, and he's sitting in the lobby of this beautiful corporate place. I don't even know if you call it a lobby. It's a lobby. It's not a hotel. So it's just sort of like communal area. And here comes Karen, his soon-to-be ex-wife, and she's got this really cool form factor. And he looks at it and he's like, this is beautiful. And it's still pretty large compared to the final one they come up with, but it's much, much better. And it's functional. This is great. And she's about to take off, and he grabs her arm. I mean, it's Christopher Walken. Just do the math, man. And he says, you know what? He says, I always avoided us working together, even though both of us work at the Institute. And, it's kind of like it's working out, man. And she's like, she's smiling the whole time. Natalie Wood's character, Karen, is pretty smiley the whole movie. It's pleasant. It's nice. And all the drama comes through this film beautifully. So the next scene we have is the new demo, which we didn't get to see this one get created. So we're surprised too. And what you have is this giant table with one phone with all these like flat bus lines going out to everybody's headset. And you have probably a dozen people in the room, all with these headsets on. And we flash into the demo to see what they're seeing. And they're riding a roller coaster. And then they flash back out, and everybody's leaning back and forth in the room because they're going up and down this roller coaster a little bit. Now we know headsets make people actually jump out of their skin, you know. I mean, honestly, if you develop this technology, you would have to arrest the outside body from reacting to would be their actions on the inside of the simulation, something that we don't do today, right? But they do a bobsled. They do snowmobiles. I'll actually let you see it yourself because there's a couple cool tricks they did which were really beautiful. Stuff that Disney Imagineers would do. The funny thing is that it ends at a Vegas casino. And there's these three hot women in bathing suits or, you know, whatever, like casino wear. And they push in this cart and it gets really saucy. And they pull out to show that all the men are, you know, being bashful and smiling in the room because they're reacting to this. And there's one older woman there and she's looking around like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And that's when Alex shuts off the system. I'm sorry, ladies. I'm sorry about that. It's pretty funny. But there's this weird guy who seems to be at the meeting who's not defined yet. And he's obviously like a Fed. He's a mole. It's not like he's not a part of the group that's financing this, but he's there, you know. And so they show that guy walking outside after the demo. He's just walking down a residential street. And all of a sudden, like this government car, this yellow, like boxy car pulls up and he gets inside and sits down. And there's other guy in there and gives him a sandwich. And he's unpacking his sandwich. He's like, okay, what'd you see, man? He's like, man, this thing was amazing. He goes, this is a whole new level of technology and communication. And he gets the sandwich out and he's like, man, you could see, you could touch, you could feel everything. And he kind of looks at his sandwich and he kind of wraps it back up. He goes, I don't even feel hungry. I feel like I just ate. The guy says, what about military applications? The dude looks at him and goes, it's wide open. And that's exactly what Lillian was worried about. So now we flash over to a country club. Really nice. Woodsy area. I think this is on the East Coast because it's by Kill Devil's Hill, which is where the Wright brothers did their first 1903 flight, supposedly. And just a digression on that, my buddy wrote a movie about the Wright brothers called First. And it's a masterpiece film, I think. It's about the Wright brothers. Apparently, the true story about the 1903 flight, the way they romantically tell it in this film is sort of the revisionistic history version of it, but they kind of corrected that. But they said that he just flew less than the span of a normal, you know, commercial flight, commercial plane's wingspan, right? The true story is the dude hit about 42 feet in the air, and they took a picture of him. And that was the 1903 proof that by the time they gave him the patent in 07, they actually had proof that they flew really high, like scary high back in the day. But they went to that location because the wind is pretty constant in that location. Probably has a bunch of windmills in it now. But Michael and Lillian are being celebrated, and it's just packed full of people. And it's really cute. The chemistry between Christopher Walken and Louise Fletcher is just priceless. I mean, it's just priceless. They kiss and they hug, but it's all platonic, and they've just been through hell and back, and they just had a success, you know. So he's got her, you know, she's got his arm, and they're just talking, and she's like, man, I've never been around this many people wanting to talk to me in my lifetime, right? But Alex, they bump into Alex at this gate area, and Alex is like, hey, he's hopping off a horse, and he looks really dapper, and he's got his whole, equestrian gear on. He's like, hey, everybody. He goes, hey, you two, you know, there's some folks upstairs that want to meet you when you get some time. You know, meet us up there in like 5 or 10 minutes. And he walks off and he's happy as can be. And that's when Michael looks over at, you know, Lillian, and he's like, we made it. We're going upstairs. This is it, man. And she's just like, oh my God, you don't know what's about to take place, man. About that time, I think it's a car pulls up. And this is when Karen gets out of the car, or maybe I don't think it's a horse. They get out of a car and Barry's there. And of course, Walken plays a pretty cool dude where he's kind of like, yeah, our marriage is screwed. I'm not going to be unprofessional about this, but he doesn't really like that guy at all. And they have this little exchange. It's pretty cute. And he's like, you really like that guy? She goes, yeah, I like him because he's a really sweet guy and he's not interesting at all. So it's like she wants a complete break from who he is as a human being, which is always kind of strange, right? But we go up to that meeting room, and they're not there yet. Michael and Lillian aren't there yet. And Alex is talking to these colonels and captains, and there's this other new guy there who's, his name is Landon in the movie. He plays the best smarmy guy ever. Here comes Lillian and Michael. And Alex tells the military guys, you need to let my people breathe. I don't mind you being involved and maybe even like technically getting a copy of this stuff, but you got to let my folks do what they do. They made this, Karen's there too. So they start talking, and Lillian is just on her guard, man. And she sees this other guy, and she kind of recognizes him, but can't quite place him. And she goes, this one guy tells her, well, we want to see if there's any, maybe military applications for this. And she goes, oh, you mean like blowing people to bits, And he goes, well, contrary to popular belief, not everything military does is about blowing people up. And that's when the smarmy guy goes, we're looking at experimenting with higher brain functions. And Michael defensively says, well, we are too. And that's when Lillian says, shut up, Michael. Like, stop giving them information. And that kind of like, oof, like you're talking to me like you're higher than me. But they get cut off pretty quickly because they end up doing lunch. And that's when only a couple of the guys from that room are in there, and that Landon guy's there. And of course, he's trying to push himself into the project, and he's offering himself as a documentation guy. Which, if you know anything about scientific research, when they're on that bleeding edge and they've got something that could be Nobel Prize or something, they're obfuscating all their notes. They do it on purpose. They write cryptic notes to themselves. Stan Myers wrote his schematics for his water-based hydrogen engine, tap water, by the way, which completely worked. Go see my episode on Stan Myers. You'll be surprised that we don't need fuel cell technology at all. He was murdered in 1998 because he came up with the technology. I was mentored for a year by a guy in Laguna who owned a big chunk of Laguna downtown. And he said they murder those guys all the time. He says there's about 5 to 7 a year that find this technology. It's easy to find. And the investment banking houses have them killed. And they get kickbacks from oil companies and stuff. Not directly, but just opportunities to make money after that, right? It's a very real deal. So she has legitimate concerns. The Landon guy tells Lillian, I went to Caltech with you. But the conversation goes back and forth and it just keeps getting worse. It gets so bad that at one point, Lillian says, I remember you, man. You were a hack at Caltech in 56 and you're a hack now. And the guy just eats it because he can't do anything about it, right? And Alex says to Lillian, God damn it, Lillian. And she says, don't goddamn me, man. And Michael's like, okay, let's get out of here. Let's get out of here. This isn't going well. Lillian's not going to back down. He's like, come on with me. Come on. And she's like, don't goddamn me, man. And Lillian just looks at Alex and says, you don't get it, do you, man? You don't get it. You don't have enough experience to understand what's happening right now. They're trying to install that guy into our project as a government spy. And of course, the guy's like, I'm not trying to spy on you. I just want to write down everything that you've done. But that's when she tells Alex, look, man, you're going to screw around and you're going to hand this off to them before we've had a chance to figure out what we can do with this and how to safeguard all the different technologies. And it's going to end up on a scrap heap in the military. Now, I think most of us know in 2024, it would just end up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base or Area 51 or Los Alamos Labs. But her point's well taken. It would be bad. It would take it away from her. So she storms inside. And Michael's kind of like, sorry, guys, whatever. And she is pulling out a little box and takes a little heart pill, puts it in her side of her cheek. And she's like, oh, God. She gets to the women's bathroom and she's like, oh, God. She's having a little heart defib thing going on, and it's not working right. And Michael rushes in to the bathroom. And Karen is working at her desk on the new packaging. And she looks over and sees first Lillian comes in and then Michael comes in. She's like, oh, I better figure out what's going on. So she gets in there. But before Karen gets into the bathroom, Michael says to her, he goes, look, man, I don't like the way you talk to me in front of other people. He says, look, I've been standing next to you since day one, and you're acting like you own the whole project. And she's like, it's not about that. You're just an idiot, you know? They're going to take this away from us. Just watch. So then Karen comes in, Natalie Wood, and she's like, hey, guys. And Alex is already in there, too. And she's like, this is a women's bathroom. You guys got to get out of here, right? And so they walk off. And that's when Karen looks to Lillian. She's like, is there anything I can do for you? And Lillian says, no, when I get upset, I have heart issues. And so sets up a premise. It's basically bad chest pains. I told you, this movie has no breaks. So now we switch to Hal's little office. This thing's just going boom, 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 boom. So it's Hal's office. And here comes the Gordy guy. The kind of slimy dude, right? And he's got a tape in his hand. It's a smaller tape than some of the other tapes, but it's full. And he says, here, I got it. He says, I don't want it, man. I don't want it. And he's like, come on, everybody at the party watched it. You don't want to be left out, do you? And it's got something on it, He says, here, and he puts it on his desk, and, Hal's like, oh, God, yeah, okay, just leave it there. And he says, okay, man, I'll see you later. And Hal puts it in his desk. So right away, they flash forward that evening, and Hal's got the tape at the play unit at the lab, and he plays it, and it's Gordy having sex with the other lady that was in the sound room. And at first, it's her sitting on top of him with her panties on, and she's just like, hey, we can't do it here, and he's like, look, man, so-and-so's not going to be back for a while. We got time. Just let's do it, right? And then it doesn't show us really what's on the tape just yet, but you see Hal take the tape, and he's got a splicer unit right there, just like movies, man. And he feeds the tape through the splicer, and you see him do a slice, and then he slices it again, and he's messing around with it. What's going on there, right? Now, what's interesting about any splice in a tape, I'm just going to say this now, because this controls generally everything that you feel, it would be interesting that if you took a heartbeat and it was being recorded in the tape, I'm not sure that's exactly what's taking place, that if you were to splice it, you could splice your heart in a really weird way such that you get a palpitation and you could just croak. But I guess that's not a problem in the sci-fi world here. But the next morning comes around and we see the lay-down bike arrives, and somehow Chris is with Michael. Maybe Karen dropped him off, can't remember. And so it's Christopher playing Michael, going up with his son Chris, and he says, well, this is it, man. And his son's played just perfectly. He's just this little punky, probably 13, 14-year-old kid. And he's just like looking around, whatever, man. He's like, what's this, man? And Michael looks at a little piece of spliced tape. It's about, it's 4 inches tall, about 3 inches wide. And he's like, what the hell's this? No one spliced any of the tapes they've created. What the hell is this? And the kid's like, well, what is this thing, man? And he puts the headset on. It's not playing or anything. And he's like, well, he goes, with that, you could probably finish like the 7th grade in like 5 minutes. He's like, turn it on. He's like, come on, man, stop touching that. Gets it off his head. But he's looking at that piece of tape. And his son goes, what is that? And he's like, I don't know. Weird. So this next scene is a scene that I didn't quite get. And all the times I've ever watched this show, you get half of it. I didn't get the whole thing. And today I got the whole thing. We switch back to work. And Karen, Michael's soon-to-be ex-wife, comes in with the brand new headset. It's teeny tiny. It's just like a little wire and some little clips and stuff. And she shows it to him. Here's the new one. And he goes, yeah, that's great. It looks great. Here. He takes it, puts it down. He goes, sit right here. And she's just like, oh, God. He puts this old headset on her. He pushes a button and the tape starts going. That whirly noise is going. And he's just looking at her. And Lillian's there and she's looking. And Karen's just sitting there the whole time, just kind of looking around like, what the hell am I doing? And then he stops it. And he says, okay. He's like, get out or whatever. He has her get out of the chair and he puts it on and he plays it back. And suddenly he sees a bunch of bad memories. And this was just recorded off of Karen, his soon-to-be ex-wife. And he's initially seeing her walk in with the fabrication, sees it through her eyes, and he dismisses her and says, sit down. And as soon as she sits down in this clip, they're immediately having an argument from a previous time. And it bounces to another argument. And Christopher, they stop the tape. And he's looking at her and he says, take it all, just go, just leave. Why are you even staying here? And Lillian and Karen are like, what the hell are you talking about, right? And so then he kind of storms off. And Lillian looks at Karen and she said, well, what were you thinking when you sat down? And Karen says, I was pissed off that he just dismissed my new design. She goes, oh, you must have been very angry while we were recording your memories. So the research, unbeknownst to the dialogue, has been continuing. And while all this other stuff's been going on, Lillian and Michael have figured out a way to record deeper. Remember what I told you, Landon said, we're looking to, higher brain functions. And Michael said, we are too. And Lillian said, shut up, Michael. They hit it. And this was a moment. So the negative emotions and specific memories of her fed into Christopher, Michael's character, or Michael, and he blew up on her. And what he says to her is very important. He says, that's not me, that's you. All those bad memories, that's your opinion of who I am. That's not me. And he storms off. So this next scene is back home that night, and it's raining outside. This is going to lead into one of the most significant scenes that I've ever seen in my life, where science fiction and story, and especially deep emotion, gets perfectly portrayed on film. I can't name anything else that's this heavy. And I got this as a child. I mean, as an adult, it should hit you square in the pants, man, in terms of like moving your emotions. But Christopher is sitting at his little workstation. It's very dark, and the machine's coolly lit, well lit. And so he is playing back that tape a little bit, and he's watching her have these bad memories. And he's thinking, he's just playing it real quick, and he's stopping, he's thinking. And then so you don't quite see what he's doing, but he starts kind of recording new stuff. And he's thinking, and then he pushes record, and then he stops, and he thinks again, and he pushes record. Now, I had misremembered one line in this film, which I've said a couple times on the show. It doesn't occur. But he goes upstairs, and she is packing pictures, and she's having a little sentimental moments because she's looking at photographs when they were happy. And she's in this Duke University jersey. It goes down past her hips, down to her knees. And he comes in with this steel case. They've got the whole thing down to this steel case. And he puts it on the bed. She says, "What are you doing?" The line I forgot, the line I misremembered for years was, I thought she said, "You're not allowed to be in here." She does not say that. That doesn't exist at all. There's no restraining order against the guy. But she's because, "What are you doing?" And he puts this on her head and he pushes play. And suddenly, the thing that all broken relationships could use, especially marriages with kids involved, happens in this room. And this is just beauty. I mean, it's just emotional perfection in storytelling. He recorded a greatest hits, what he really thinks about her, what he really feels about their situation, about the house and its priority or lack of priority in their life. He just loves her. And it doesn't matter all this bullshit around them. And so she goes through a whole litany of memories of their getting to know each other, because they met each other in this area, probably at the lab. And it gets done playing, and she looks at him, and she says something to the effect of, "I didn't know." And he basically, got the chance to retell from his perspective absolutely perfectly what was misunderstood through organic life, and fixes it. It's like a Black Mirror moment, but it's super positive. And so that entire evening turns into one of the most endearing montages without music. They're living it out. We're hearing their dialogue, and they raid a refrigerator, and they go get their wedding clothes, and they have this beautiful moment where they choose to get married again, and they frolic, and it ends up with them in bed with the sheet over their head and a flashlight underneath. And he says to her, "Sing me that song." And there's this song she sings. It's kind of a weird song. It's just their thing, right? And so the next day, they wake up, just sprawled out on the bed. It's daytime, and the son, Chris, comes in, and he looks at him and he goes, "I know you couldn't live without us." Boom, the marriage is back on. Barry's out the door. The kid's happy. They're happy. They're not going to be separated again. Now, just about this moment, the phone rings. We're not even at the break point here, because the break point's going to be cool. I mean, you can bell it anytime you want, but there might just be one break in this. But the phone rings. And, Christopher's still under the sheets, and his kid's right there. They ask the kid to make him breakfast. They put this giant order in. The kid doesn't know how to probably cook it anyway. French toast and all this other stuff. But he reaches over, grabs the phone, and he's like, "What?" Instantaneously, we see the Bronco, brand new, 83-ish Bronco. And it's Christopher as Michael just hauling ass with Karen, and he just drives up on the curb of this house, parks it, back wheels, and still in the street, and they hop out, and this woman runs out of the door, and it's Hal's house. And Hal's wife is like, "He's downstairs in his den." So Karen stays with the wife. Michael rushes downstairs, and Hal's downstairs in his robe, and he is just pulsing. His body's just pulsing and pulsing, and the tape is off to his left, and it's in about a 4-foot loop. And Walken's like, he plugs in an alternate monitoring, headset. And you get the sense, I watched it again, you get the sense he's only seeing what's in there. He's not feeling it. But if he had felt it, he would have had an experience, because he puts a headset on, and we're now deep inside that sexual tape. The woman's naked, and you can obviously see both people are climaxing in this video. And I think it really went it twice for us to know it's looped. And Christopher, playing Michael, takes the head off, pulls his head off, pulls his headset off, and Hal looks at him, and he kind of wakes up, and he's like, he wants him to turn it back on. He's like, "Give it to me. I need it. Give it to me." Okay. Next scene, we see Hal's inside this pressurized tube with an EKG unit hooked up. Lillian's in there with him, and she's looking at the EKG and just kind of marking up the tape. The paper's coming out with those needles scratching, And Alex is outside with Michael looking through the window, and Alex is like, "We're just going to keep this between us, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, okay." So then Michael goes into the tube, talks to Hal. Hal's doing well, and he's got tons of energy. And he takes this, he stops the test, and he pulls a little thing out of his mouth, and he's like, "Hey, man," he goes, "I feel reborn. I don't know where I'm getting all this energy. I'm a different man. I'm a new man." And Michael actually looks over at Lillian, and Lillian's just marked off this little area, and she's nodding at him like, "Yep, he has been re-energized. Whatever he did with this tape gave him back some of his youth." You imagine that therapy? "Going over to the orgasm clinic, sweetheart. Got to get my energy up. Better than coffee." But then they pull the camera out, And we find out there's another lab that's been built on site, and it is spying on their lab. And so that whole conversation in that tube was recorded. And that landing guy's there, and he's like, record that. Got to get it over to these people to be seen. So now we know they're being spied on. This is where we're going to go to the next scene, and this is the cutoff point scene. This is the whole linchpin of the film. This is really, in my opinion, the end of Act 1. But I think it's actually technically the turning point of Act 2, which means the center of Act 2, 60 minutes into the script. Lillian is working late one night, and she's always working. She's just there all the time, chain smoking, crunching on the computer. But she takes a bit of a break. And the way that the lab's set up, the way the shot's set up so you can see it, is that there's a soldering iron, red soldering iron, and the needle's poking up. And just beyond the soldering iron is an ashtray, and her smoke is in there, and it's throwing off a little bit of smoke. Now she opens her little pill thing and stuffs a little pill in the side of her mouth, closes the box up, and then reaches over to get a cigarette and burns her wrist. And obviously pulls back really fast and knocks some equipment off a table in that moment, right? She's like, oh God, she's, kissing her wound. She's like, oh God, that hurt like a son of a bitch. Now she did just take a heart pill. But she knocked like a microscope off, I think, or something. And she reaches over to pick it up. And she grabs it. And she starts tugging on it. Boom. In comes a massive heart attack. And she drops the thing, reels back, grabs her chest. Oh my God. She opens that pill box back up. She manages to get one in there, but in trying to close it, boom, she drops the box. Pills are all over the ground. And now she's in so much pain. She's kind of incapacitated, right? But she's on a chair that has wheels. And she's up on a separate level. It's about probably 3 feet up from the next level down where they have the big equipment, right? She's got a little workstation up there. So she starts pushing herself on this chair. She goes around the corner. She's trying to get to the steps, and the steps are like 2 or 3 steps. And so she gets herself to it and slides off that chair and grabs a rail, and she starts, and just, I'm telling you, Louise Fletcher nails this scene on a level that will move you. Okay, this is not some 2-bit actress doing some scene. This is cream of the crop thespian taking you on a ride, okay? And she is having this fucking heart attack, and she's grabbing her chest. She toughens up, and she's trying to get to this next chair. So she's leaning on the console, and she gets in the other chair and flops back. And she grabs the phone. And she's just trying to dial, and she's going through all this pain, and she's just doing everything absolutely perfect. And she says, Michael, Mike, and then she slams the phone down. And we don't know if that call went through. And so she then grabs a headset, puts it on her head, and she's hitting these buttons, and she's literally paralyzed a little bit trying to hit these buttons. And she goes with this other console, pushes some buttons, and I think maybe at that point she puts the headset on. She hits 2 more buttons than the original one and hits record. And this is what the movie is all about. She pushes record. And she dies. And this thing is recording. And we just saw with the demo with Karen, it records memories. That's how deep this thing has gone. It's not just the here and now. It's subconscious. It's maybe even beyond, right? So Trumbull and team just do an amazing job shooting this scene. This is like, Trumbull knew this was a pivotal scene for the film. And so they just, and I think it's largely one shot, maybe 3 camera cuts tops. And she lays back in this chair and she's kind of grinning. Like, you know what? If I'm going to go out, I'm going to record this, and this is going to go to the next level. And I won't even be here to see it. But this is for Michael. The door opens up. As soon as she goes glass-eyed and she's out, Michael opens the door. and you just hear him, I think, say Lillian. You don't even see him in camera. And then we continue the film. So if you want to jump out to see what happens, now's your time. It's $3.99 on Prime Video. I don't know where else you can get it. I downloaded it off of archive.org. You just got to get a little clever there. So we immediately go to Lillian's funeral. It's beautiful. It's in a really great part of the country. It's in that big giant church that's shaped like a cross in the middle of the forest. I think it's a very famous location. And they're walking, it's literally Michael, Karen, and Alex walking down the aisle after services are over. And Alex just can't get into the funeral. He's like, okay, she's a great woman, da-da-da. But by the way, Michael, the whole project's yours. And Michael's like, not right now, dude. But Michael goes back to the lab. And the tape is right there. And he's taken it off the spindle and he's put it on a little desk thing. And that's when Hal comes in. Hal's a reborn man. He is so freaking happy and youthful. And he's like, hey, buddy, I'm retiring. I'm out. And this is what he said, I think, at the EKG thing. But he said, I'm taking a full disability of indeterminate time frame. So he's going to get paid for the rest of his life, basically. But he comes into Michael and he's like, hey, I'm taking off. Just want to say goodbye. And he looks down at the tape and he's like, is that the tape? And he says, yep. He goes, I want to play it. And he's like, okay. All right. We cut over to this spy lab and it's this guy's just chewing his gum like he's like a cow chewing its cud, right? Something my father would slap the shit out of me for if I ever did that. He'd say, stop chewing your cud. So they hook the tape up and Michael puts the headset on and Hal's there operating it, and they push play. And Michael goes into a cardiac arrest. And Walken's portrayal of this moment is just so believable. And Hal turns the whole thing off, and then Walken's got to get out of this cardiac arrest, and he is just, he's just convulsing and just, oh my God, it's perfect. So the lab technician is watching. He had made the phone call, you guys got to get down here. They're trying to play this tape. And that's when Michael and Hal start talking. He's like, we got to turn off the respiratory part of this tape. We got to change the system. And so they kind of flash forward and you see all the dudes come into the spy lab. And meanwhile, back at Christopher, and this is so technically apt, it's crazy. They're looking at this really dense circuit board, not the miniaturized stuff we have today. It was, it's like old fashioned kind of boards. And you see Walken with the flashlight in his mouth. Hal's looking over his shoulder because he's not technical. And Christopher Walken's knocking out dip switches. That's exactly how you would do it. And you just knock out the dip switches. Those of you who worked on a remote control for a garage door, you know all about dip switches, right? But he's shutting off the respiratory part of it. The problem is the spy lab has the whole kit and caboodle. And so he puts the headset back on. And the landing guy's like, okay, we're going to have to monitor this tape. And that's when the cud chewing guy's like, hey, he mentioned something about the heart and respiratory. He's like, screw it, man. We're going to monitor this. Gordon, put your headset on. So Gordy is there, right? So Gordon puts the headset on and they start playing the tape. And Christopher Walken starts seeing what Lillian was seeing in the lab until she dies. And then she starts floating away from her body, just like they've always said. And Trumbull and team, he's a special effects god, right? He is. He is the first OG god of special effects. They put this together in the most incredibly believable scenario that you've ever seen. And it's just pulling away. The lighting's amazing. And even though it's daytime in the lab, it's for Lillian, it was nighttime. So it's that time frame. And it pulls out of that world. And all of a sudden, there's these bubbles everywhere. And they're in a grid. And every bubble has a movie scene going inside of it. And so Christopher Walken is just sitting in a lab, and in his vision, he's going inside one of the bubbles. And Lillian's having all these memories. She's having positive memories about them working on a robot back in the day, stacking Coke cans, where the Coke sponsorship shows up. Funny little scene there. I'll let you watch it. Then she's arguing with Alex on this little lofty balcony at the Institute about taking away the project. And then she's with, I think, some love interest of hers. And he's saying, it sounds like you're working too hard. And meanwhile, back in the spy lab, Gordy's listening to the tape and they didn't turn off his heart sensor. So Gordon is like, just, oh my God, he's in a complete massive heart attack in the other room. And no one seems to be noticing it first until he starts cacking and making weird noises. And they look at him and they're not shutting the damn thing off. And Alex is in the room because he's a traitor. He just sold out. And he's telling Landon to shut it off. Shut it off, man. Not for Walken. His unit's still going. So Landon shuts off their unit. And Gordy is just in massive heart attack mode. He's lurching back in the chair, and they don't even know what the hell's going on because they're idiots. But at this point, we see in this illusion, in this playback for Michael, Hal's face pushes through the illusion. And he's like, I'm turning it off, Mike. I'm turning it off. And Hal turns off the tape because he's a little concerned that, Michael's just not responding. And he doesn't know what's on the tape, right? Next scene is Michael in the hospital. And Alex shows up and says, you got to stop this crap. You don't play the tape. No one plays the tape. And Michael's like, it's my tape. I'm playing the tape. It was left for me. He's like, you can't be doing this, man. I don't know. So right after the hospital, they go home. Michael and Karen, and they're talking. And he says, you know what? He goes, my entire life, I felt so secure about everything. I wasn't afraid of anything. Anything I touched, I, turned to gold, sort of implication, right? And he says, when I played that tape, he goes, it scared the crap out of me. And he goes, I actually kind of like that feeling, and I don't want it to go away because it's a new feeling for me, and it's doing something to me. And now they're in love again, right? Because of the machine, they're in love again. And Karen basically looks at him and says, okay, here's the thing. If you're going to play this tape, I'll help you. But, and they're in this wild observatory. When I was a kid, I saw them having an observatory outside this house. I was like, I literally tried to build one in my backyard once. But she says, look, just promise me you'll never leave me again. At this point, they have real champagne. And he goes, it's a deal. And they toast. So after that, Michael goes back to the laboratory. It's kind of implied he's been gone a couple days. And now his lab is really clean. And Landon's there. He's wearing the Institute lab jacket, which we'd never seen him do that before. And a bunch of other dudes in there that had never been involved with the project. And Landon's looking at a stack of papers and with a bunch of other guys looking at the paperwork. And other guys are taking machines out of certain areas. And Michael's like, what are you doing? He says, we're trying to clean up your mess. And so Michael grabs the paperwork and Landon's like, we'll figure it out. Don't even worry about it. We'll figure out what you did. And he's like, he starts wadding up the papers and Michael's like, put that down and da-da-da. But Alex comes in and basically lets Michael know, you're done. Michael asks, Alex, where's the tape, man? And Alex says it's locked away where no one's ever going to see it. So after he yells at the scientists and Alex tells them, you're out, it's over, his past still works for the day. And so he roams around the Institute and finds that they have built a robot factory in this other wing of the Institute. And he looks through the window and he sees them building the suitcases. And they've got like a helmet with the unit inside. It's like literally a total helmet. And the case was being built with like a little monitor and a keyboard, and these robot arms are bringing everything down. This huge fabrication. These other robots driving through, carrying boxes. So he asked to see if he can go. He asked if he can go in and take a look at the operation. And this guy says, your badge is dead tomorrow. And he says, well, it is dead tomorrow, but can I go in today? He's like, yeah, go ahead. But if you go in there, put your PPOE on, put your glasses on, your hat on, your OSHA stuff. So he does. He goes in there. And we just see him observe everything. Essentially, this has been going on for a while. His tech has been usurped and packaged at a level, a speed that he never knew was happening. But he keeps his cool. So from that point, we see a golf course. And we see old Hal working on a front tire of his golf cart. I think it was a 3-wheeler. And he's like ratcheting down there. And here comes the Bronco. Here comes Michael. And he tells him that he's locked out. Can't play the tape. But he wants to see the tape, right? He says, is there anything you know about what's inside, about the systems that will, help me get back in? And he says, well, try the Project Brainstorm. I had forgotten that this dude, Hal, got the actual title credit line. He says, I knew you wouldn't let me down. Thanks a lot, man. Goes back to his house, gets into his terminal. This terminal thing is like a full computer terminal, and it's got the unit hooked into it. And so he starts hacking into the system. And the cud-chewing tech, he notices that, this computer starts beeping, and he calls on the telephone. He says, you better get over here. He calls this other dude, who was the guy in the car at the beginning of the film. He's better go take a look at this. So that guy shows up, and they're watching him hack into the system. And he goes, should I cut him off? And he's like, no, let's just see how far he gets. And he gets way into the system. And it's actually fascinating in 83 is you see a hex kind of assembly display that was actually not something that average developers actually had access to until a little bit later in that decade. So Trumbull did a great job with the tech. But he gets all the way into these recordings, and he doesn't quite find her tape yet. But you find out that they've got a room with a robot that actually has all these tapes laying on their sides in these slanted shelves. And if you have access, the robot arm will pick it up, put it on a spindle, and play it to you over the telephone. So he finds this, he gets into top security, and he finds that there's a whole bunch of weird, inside the Brainstorm project, there's heavy stuff in there, marked toxic. As soon as you pull up that tape, it's this word toxic comes on the screen. So beautiful. Nothing's left out, man. And it's barely, there's really nothing that's even believable. The interfaces are 83 interfaces, very cool. So he chooses to play a tape marked toxic. And the guy says, should I cut him off? And he's like, no, let him have it. See what happens. And he pushes play on this tape from his house. And all of a sudden he sees that Landon guy dressed in a suit inside at this desk. His room's empty, but 2 weird flags and whatever agency, seals on the back wall. It was something made up, I think. And that guy's looking at the camera. It's a fisheye lens to make it nice and weird. And he goes, you're about to play a tape that could cause serious damage and serious trauma. This is not to be played by any government employees. He says, you have 5 seconds to terminate this tape. And Landon just counts it down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And of course, Michael's going to watch it. Instantaneously, it's gnarly as hell. I'll just let you watch the movie. Something happens. But very quickly, he turns it off. But he just puts the headset down. The unit's still on. It's still streaming to that tape. And he's pissed. He's pissed that his technology has been used. He looks out the window, and Karen shows up in the car. Comes back from maybe the grocery store or something. So she pops in the front door, and he's like, they sold us out. Alex sold us out. She's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, the government, they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff with our technology, right? Now, when he came down the stairs, you got to pay attention. Chris, the kid's coming out of the pool area. He's dripping wet, got his towel. He's headed upstairs. So Karen and Michael are arguing downstairs, and they follow Chris upstairs. Chris has always wanted to know what's on this unit. So he goes into his dad's room, notices the thing is right there, on, headset right there. Kid puts it on, pushes play. What they have done is they've taken the technology, and it grabs your most terrifying, emotionally disturbing vision you could possibly have, and it gives it to you. And so the kid imagines his father sticking him inside a machine and yelling at him and doing some other stuff. And kid starts going through this horrible, horrible experience. Meanwhile, Karen and Michael are making their way back upstairs. And Walken does this just fabulous moment, this little tiny scene where he catches his kid with that damn thing on. And he knows what his kid is seeing because he just saw like 2 seconds of it. He knocks that thing off his kid's head and grabs his son and just, calls out his name. And it's just Christopher. Whoa. Just at his prime. Let me just tell you, if you love Christopher Walken, you have to see this movie. You should own it or have it at your fingertips at any moment. So naturally, the next scene is at the hospital. And this doctor comes around the corner to Michael and Karen sitting there. And he's like, what's going on at your house? Your kid is like, he's going to have to remain here for a couple days of observation. And this is horrible. Like and Michael's like, it'll never happen again. It'll never happen again. Then Alex shows up at the hospital. Always trying to cover the bases, right? Just to keep the project going. Doesn't want any bad news. He shows up. And I think he accuses Michael of messing around the Brainstorm project. And Michael says, I don't know anything about this Brainstorm project. What are you talking about? He's okay, whatever. And he says, well, have you seen Gordy? And he says, no, man. And he goes, well, he's dead. He's like, well, then you guys spied on me, man, and that's your own damn problem. And that's when he tells Alex, that tape, Lillian's tape, is my tape. You don't take it away from me. And of course, Alex is like, screw you, you're never going to see that thing. And that's when Karen comes up to Michael and pushes him towards the elevator. She says, honey, just relax. Just relax. You've been overstressed. Lots been going on. Let's just go on a little vacation. We'll take a couple days off. And Michael looks down at her, knowing that she's got his back now. And he looks over at Alex and he goes, yeah, she's right. I should just take some time off. It's a weird little moment because they're up to something and it was Karen's idea. So the next scene, and we're heading into the third act, okay? So if you want to see that all by yourself, without me telling you what's going to happen, now is another time to check out. But they pull up to this gorgeous hotel. It actually looks like one of those hotels that used to be a military installation, where they commandeered a few hotels and converted them. I think the original Overlook Hotel in Colorado, which is not the one in the movie, that's in Oregon, was one of those hotels where they built like a Manhattan Project thing underneath. It looks like that place. Anyway, they pull up in their Bronco and they're just lovey-dovey. And they get out and he tips the guy and he says, there's 2 suitcases there and there's 2 metal ones. Be careful of those metal ones. Tips the guy out. Thank you, sir. And they walk in and they're jolly happy. And the next scene is that they're at dinner, middle of the day. And they're having dinner. Michael and Karen having lunch, I should say. And Christopher Walken's playing Michael, and he looks over and he sees these 2 feds about 4 tables down. He's like, look at those guys, they're right there just staring at us, right? Karen's like, don't pay attention to him, And he's like, what? He goes, what do you want to look at? You want to hear what we're talking about? Why don't you come over? And Walken gets up, and he walks over to him and he's like, hi, my name's Michael. And he shakes their hands and he's like, why don't you just come over? You don't spy on us, just come over. And Karen's just like, Michael, just leave it alone, just ignore it. And he's like, get away from me, man. It's like, I'm talking right now. And they fake this little fight. And something like, screw you. And he pushes her and she's like, don't push me. And she runs off. And then he walks off. They're up to something. It's very apparent. He goes back to his room, opens one of his cases. She's left with the other case. She takes a cab. She goes to Hal's house, which is just down the block, just by the golf course. It's this beautiful little wooden place. And she sets up a station there. And they call each other on the phone through the unit because they take the hotel phone and put it in the system. Then they have these other cool phones that are attached to it. Of course, the feds are monitoring the call. And they start having this bullshit conversation about, hey, I'm sorry. I know. We just, we just need time to regroup and all this other stuff. And they have this lovey-dovey conversation. And she's like hacking in the system on the other side for him and passing him information. That's the way I get it anyway. I get the fact that she's the one calling the lab. That way her phone number is not being traced, and she's passing it through the phone to him on his unit. At least that's the way you should think about it, because it's way better that way. But they're hacking into the system, and she gets the tape played. The robot arm grabs Lillian's tape. It says Lillian Reynolds right on top of the tape, puts it in the play unit, and starts playing it. But just before it goes, he says, "Why don't you tell me a story about us?" And she goes, "Okay." And she starts telling this super long-winded story, and the feds are monitoring the call, and they're getting bored to death. They're watching TV at the same time. But that gives him a cover for listening to the tape while she's talking about this little love story between them. Now, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit of this because, one, you can watch how it all unravels and its specific detail. But what she ends up doing, because Hal also knows the system. He's not a scientist, but he knows the security system. As he's listening to the tape, she's getting down more codes. And eventually, they notice the tape is playing. The feds notice the tape is playing, a different group of guys at the laboratory. But she locks everybody out. She locks down all of the doors so they can't get to the tape physically. And that's when they make the call, arrest him. So he gets cut off because they managed to pause the tape. And he realizes, oh shit, I got to get out of here. So he packs up his box and he starts to head out of the hotel. And those two goons from the lunch start coming at him. He knocks over a cart in front of him, runs outside. He's got his Bronco kind of hidden in the woods, jumps in that thing, takes off. And the plan B is that they're going to meet at this Wright Brother location, which is, it's Kill Devil's Hill. Kill Devil Hill or something like that. And it's got this Wright Brothers memorial up there. I don't know what you call it. And there's a payphone up there. So he's going to jack into a payphone and get this baby finished up. It's already in the system. It just needs to be turned back on, right? Well, now Karen is talking to Hal, and she's like, this code's for this code's for that, and this code will finish him off. She's writing it all down. She hands it off to Hal. Leaves the machine with him. Hal's with his wife, and he's just having a blast, right? Now, technically speaking, he could be risking his retirement, but whatever. He's got his back, right? I'm assuming Natalie grabs Hal's station wagon, but she runs off in the vacation station wagon, headed up to that location. And Michael's already jacked in. Hal starts typing in these new codes. What ends up occurring is you find out they want to destroy the whole facility. But how do you do that? Well, remember the robot factory? One of the codes gets all the robots to go absolutely berserk. And it starts offsetting all the robots, making them drive too fast, crashing into walls. All the units that are doing fabrication are just off by milliseconds. They're engaging too much. So the helmet creation thing just crushes all the helmets, and it crushes all the cases and a couple security guards. This is where it gets a little slapsticky for a split second. Just a split second. There's no goofy music or anything. One of the robots laughs with his little tongs. That part's for the kids. It's funny. It's cool. But Michael goes up there and starts playing the tape again. And the photography and the special effects would stand up today. It's really nuts how perfect they did this. But he is seeing all kinds of wild stuff. I won't try to describe absolutely everything to you. But she's, hauling ass up there. The factory's going down. Everything's locked out. The feds are trying to get to that room. And they're having to bust out glass. They're having to use diamond saws on the locks. Landon is going out of his mind trying to stop this thing. They go back to the central computer and they're trying to figure out how to stop, the recording from going out the phone lines. They trace the call. They find out where he is physically. Supposedly they're sending agents, but they never arrive. And he is having the two huge highlights, okay, is that there's a sequence where Michael sees hell. And they put some money in this, man. I mean, it is, I'll just let you see it. But there's a sequence for hell. And they just keep pushing closer and closer to, Walken's face. And I mean, if an actor acts with his face, Walken is walking away with an Oscar on this. But of course, science fiction movies never win anything, right? This should have won for a script, nothing else. Should have won for special effects, and it should have won for a script, because this is 1983. I think the only thing that came out around that time was maybe Indiana Jones, maybe. Anyway, he then starts going towards this galaxy. And obviously, we're dealing with the spiritual journey of what happens after life, right? The laboratory gets to a point where they're just about to stop everything, and Hal puts in the kill switch, the last code she gave him, and the whole lab loses power. And Landon, nearly like pulls cables out, and that's when Ellie says, "Let it go, man. Let it go. You lost. We lost. He won." That tape is playing and playing and playing. They just can't get to that freaking room. They got the diamond saw on there. And then about the time they get the diamond saw on the last lock, you see the tape just end. And Karen is right there with him. And she puts her, head on his chest. And she's about to stop the call, about to stop the thing. And he reaches over and says, "Don't stop it." And then it ends. The tape ends. But you remember what happened with the heart attack sequence, right? Christopher Walken played the heart attack accidentally to himself, and even though they shut off the tape, he was still having the heart attack. Even though he played back Karen's memories and the tape was over, he was still yelling at her. It sends you on a journey. It's the training wheels, right? So now Michael is entering literally the chambers of heaven in this visual sequence. And I'm telling you, I have seen lots of movies since then that attempted to portray heaven. Trumbull and team nail it. I mean, they nail what DMT people have said about what this sequence looks like. In fact, it is extremely accurate to all Joe Rogan and Graham Hancock, all their descriptions of DMT and seeing beings of light. My buddy, who's taken it so many times, he's not taking it anymore. This sequence is exactly what they said they saw. Makes you wonder if Trumbull ever tripped out on this stuff. But the tape's over. And he starts kind of collapsing into Karen's arms. And Karen's just, it's very altered states, man. She grabs him and she's like, "Michael, you can't die. You made a promise to me. Don't die. Don't leave me. You made a promise to me." And it's echoing in his world. He can hear her, but it's echoing in the chamber of heaven. And Natalie her voiceover on this is just stellar. Okay. And eventually it's the age-old story of love conquers all, right? But I'm telling you, you hear that cliche arc for films and you see it a bunch of times, but I'm telling you, this one is at an epic level of love conquers all. Let me just tell you. And it's over. He wakes up out of this thing. He comes back from heaven. He's not supposed to be there in the first place. He didn't die. Lillian is the one that died. But what he finds out is Lillian went to heaven. She was shown hell, and then she went to heaven. No reason for her to be in hell. Must just be a sequence in this particular storyline. And he grabs Natalie, and he picks her up in his arms, like her whole body, and he gives her a gigantic kiss. He puts her down, and he says, "Look at the stars, look at the stars." And he goes, "We made it. We made it. We did it. We've conquered we've seen the whole thing now with this new invention." And then they just roll credits. You have to see this film. I've definitely, it's not my narration and the pictures aren't going to do this thing any justice from moving. Okay. I skipped a few things. Not much, but I skipped a little bit. And you want to see the pressure and the sequences go before your eyes. Now, for those of you who know about Natalie Wood and those of you who don't, this is her last film. We won't get terribly into the conspiracy on her death, but she literally died where I'm sitting right now. If you just drew a line straight west, it's Catalina Island. She died, I don't know how many miles away that is. It's not that far. But she died right outside where I am, just off the coast of where I'm sitting right now. And, you know, the latest story on that was that there was a captain on the boat, Christopher Walken on the boat, and her husband. So her husband's name's Robert Wagner. I should have known that. I didn't know they were married twice, from 57 to 62, and then remarried in 72. She married another guy in between, all the way to her death. The way the story goes is that the captain and Walken were in the front of the boat. This is how big this boat was. She had had a lot to drink. She was very upset about something. And Robert apparently got embarrassed that she was in that state, took her to the back of the boat, and what we think happened was he just pushed her off the boat into the water. Probably not thinking she was going to drown. Here's the problem with this. And I don't mean to insert a downer in the middle of this, but we'll talk about the movie for just a bit. She had always had a fear because her mother kept telling her when she was young, this is from her sister, this is gnarly, fucked up behavior from a parent, that you're going to die in the water at night. Her mother told her that, supposedly. Well, she died in the water at night, drowned because she was drunk. Horrible death for a wonderful woman. It's pretty apparent that he caused that to occur. It's weird. I don't know what kind of murder charge that is, because you're the reason why she died, but you weren't trying to kill her. You were just pissed at her and pushed her in the water and figured she'd climb up the back of the boat. Maybe that anxiety from being told that, just plus being drunk, and it was horrible. I mean, imagine dying in the middle of the night in salt water. I mean, that is freezing cold. I don't give a shit what time of year. Maybe if it was late June, you wouldn't be freezing to death. But she dies while making this film. And they must have filmed her scenes in their totality. There's nothing missing from this film. There's no sense that anything is missing out of this film. So if she died during the making of this film, it would have been after filming had completed. But I will say, if this is her last work, it's wonderful. She doesn't hand in necessarily her best work of her entire life, but she hands in some amazing performances right when the movie needs her to ratchet it up. And she's so pleasantly filmed in the film too. So she looks beautiful in all the scenes, which is really cool. But I will say that Walken, I've seen, I think, virtually all the modern stuff that he's done. I haven't seen all of his television show appearances or that kind of stuff, but he was in his prime. It's 1983. He's in his physical prime. And he just had his craft down by this time. The other interesting thing that this film brings us is what Black Mirror brings us, which is, okay, take some technology, introduce it to society in a fictional sense because it doesn't exist yet. This is 1983, folks. Tron had just come out the year before. And so we got a glimpse of what it would be like to be inside of a computer in a fictional way, right? You have to understand, by 1983, you're talking about probably, technically speaking, less than 1% of the households in the world had a computer, whether it be a microcomputer or a desktop computer. I mean, the PC had come out in 81, so maybe you're a few percentage points. But you take the whole world, you're definitely below 1%. Modern first world countries, maybe 1 or 2, 3%. So to have this so well thought out is really tremendous. I heard that, was it Stranger Days, which was like a 97 film, that film was supposed to be a prequel to this film? Whatever. Brainstorm is a self-encapsulated film that takes us through what this sort of technology could be used as. And if you really think about where we are today with big machine learning, AI neural nets, emulating like GPT engines and other engines, and we really haven't seen AI unleashed. We've seen it conservatively passing out information. It's phenomenal right now in 2024. But this isn't even artificial intelligence. This is simply brute force, sensory input recording, plus getting to the deeper levels of consciousness. Now, what's interesting about the film is they didn't go into trying to technically explain everything. If Arthur C. Clarke had written it, we'd be sitting there for hours listening to dialogue about exactly how they recorded memories, right? They just did it so they could portray the drama to say, look what could happen if this technology was introduced. They also brilliantly show you the two spectrums of how this technology could be used. You have the two spectrums. First spectrum is Walken making the film for Natalie. He saves their marriage by portraying his true emotions for his wife, realigning what got misaligned by bad communication in a relationship, causing a divorce with a 14-year-old kid. And then they show you Project Brainstorm, where they went into the deepest depths of the subconsciousness and actually engineered from the output of your brain into a computer and somehow back to the brain so that you would see what would terrify you most. This was also portrayed in the movie that came out the same year, Dreamscape, where it was the guy from Warriors was able to read your mind and give you the monster in your dreams that would freak you out the most, right? What's sad about the reality of which I'm giving you, just like Twilight Zones, they're for intelligent people. They really are. If you watch a Twilight Zone and you're entertained, you're an intelligent person. Just like Monty Python, just like Douglas Adams. If you listen to a Douglas Adams story and you're not entertained, sorry, don't go run off and take a Mensa test anytime soon. So these are super intelligent films that are only watched by people like you and I. And so all that information, all that cautionary tale that's portrayed in this film is never going to be ingested by anybody, which is why we walk headstrong into solutions like TikTok, which is reprogramming your kids to hate you, right? So this is one of the biggest heirlooms of my entire, family's collection. Another one is Altered States. I don't know if there's any real sort of, I have a discipline for the films that I cover with you guys and that it applies to our day and age today. Altered States is an amazing film with William Hurt. Came out, I think, 1981. It's just wild. It's just a work of art. But it's just a movie that's kind of off on the side without any... It has some special effects in it that were pretty amazing. And William Hurt is beyond at his peak in that film. But this film is something that will be coming in probably the next 30 years or so. What we don't know is whether or not this kind of technology has been created to date, I think probably all of the senses, of all the senses that we would be recording and playing back to the mind, the visual is going to be the toughest, right? Making you feel things, yeah, your whole brain's up there and it's the body that we're in, that our soul's attached to. Yeah, you could probably make your fingertips feel something by hitting the fingertip parts, but the brain is a three-dimensional object. And so those tubes in your brain, remember the whole body's nothing but a big tube. It is, it's just all tubes, right? Trying to get down to the inner depths of the brain and touch just the inside of a neural patch that's going to give you something. All of our brains are a little bit different, we're different sizes. They wiggle differently in the brain. They don't cut my brain apart and your brain apart and say, oh, see that exact formation. No, it's generally that formation. That's about it. So you'd have to map the brain of a particular individual, probably run some orientation tests, just like when you put your finger on a phone to teach it your thumbprint or your face recognition. You'd have to do some stuff. Well, is this your finger? No, that's my elbow. Okay, and then move those little sensors around. But if they could ever calibrate some sort of test where they're touching the outside of your body and just watching what part of your brain recognizes that, they could probably map you pretty quick. But the visual is tough, right? The density of your visual cortex is, again, you're only using 5% of your visual cortex because there's a weird protein blocker that has been inserted inside your visual cortex to stop the signal from using the other 95%. It's really strange. maybe, it's 10%, right? There's 5 slices and you only use half of the first slice. So that's 10%. So talking to that 10% and making sure it's upside down and backwards so your brain projects it properly. I don't know. They're definitely playing in that area, and they've been playing in that area for years. But this kind of tech goes way underneath the radar for a really long time. And part of this whole technological platform that we have to consider is, it's just like the UFO argument I made in the Future Matrix episode, right? You can't show people technology at a certain level without completely freaking them out, because if they can imagine and conceive of their ability to control a big part of our brain, and they see that they could insert, sound in your ears and visuals into your brain and make you see something, then your brain's going to do the leapfrog calculation of what else do they have. And nobody wants to learn that potentially a military-industrial complex or worse has that much control over the human body, right? So they'll be careful about ever exposing this to anybody. It'll be used in a clandestine manner forever, most likely, right? But anyway, it's getting late. Hope you enjoyed it. This is the final absolute coverage of this film. Now I can just reference this episode without going into a big digression on all my episodes. But anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Everything's up there. The podcast, all the clips. BitChute and Rumble also have the videos. BitChute has the most complete collection of them all. I am going to go through an exercise on Rumble and take full inventory of what it has, because there's some episodes missing, but there's no efficient way to find out without going through every single one of them. It's missing a few hundred, I think, but they're the earlier ones, so you can help BitChute. But just go to the website. The website has everything, plus they're searched and indexed and all that good stuff. To the PayPal and Patreon folks, thank you so much, and make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.